welcome back to another episode of The Slice of Mentorship. Today we are thrilled to have an esteemed guest with us, Rochelle Clarke, a recognized authority on business strategy, continuity, and transitions. Rochelle is the founder and managing director of Succession Strength, an advisory firm specializing in strategic transition guidance. She is the author of the 5 Critical Succession Conversations, a comprehensive guide for the family businesses, and sought after contributor for Forbes on topics related to business continuity. So hi, Rochelle.
Hi, Igor.
It was really cool to meet you at the FinTech InsurTech Generations Conference was it last week?
It was just last week, and truly it was an amazing experience. I love being here in Charlotte. It was a fantastic conference, and then of course with our connection and your interest, I am more than happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. And for you, this is right? These days, you do not spend that much time in the United States, correct?
No, that's right. I split time between the US and Europe. When I'm in Europe, I am in Amsterdam, and then when I'm here, I am in the Charlotte area. So it's a bit of back and forth, but this is the moment that I'm in the US for the summer.
Awesome. So I'm super excited to have you and an opportunity to have a conversation with you. So my first question is, can you describe what do you primarily get paid to do?
Oh, that's a good question. I primarily get paid to help individuals and companies who are going through a business transition, whether that transition is a succession or a sale, right? So it's preparing the individual or preparing the company to ensure that they're able to maximize value whenever the business is able to exit.
So what's behind that story? How did you get into this business?
So it's a winding road that we walked. I think it began, I know that it began quite a number of years ago. I was enjoying the corporate life, working quite a bit in one of the Fortune 500 companies, when I had a crisis of continuity in one of the family businesses within my own family. Where the owner passed away, the daughter wasn't ready to take over, so there was a little bit of chaos at that moment. I found myself stepping in and ensuring that the company had some sort of a business continuity approach to ensure that they were still able to service clients, at the same time ensuring that income was still coming in to support the family. As you can imagine, it was a tough time trying to plan a funeral. At the same time, you're figuring out how to keep this business running. And it was at that moment that I recognized that, hey, family businesses are particularly vulnerable when it comes to transitions. Unplanned transitions, of course, but definitely transitions. So this is where I think that the kernel of the idea really took root. But as I mentioned, I was quite comfortable and not ready to make the change. So it was an idea that I kind of pushed to the background for a number of months, I would say, going on to 2 years perhaps. But then I decided, you know what? Businesses are vulnerable, and I really don't see anyone in the marketplace putting my idea forward. So this is something that I embarked on. Started up the advisory company, focusing on succession within family-owned businesses, but always with an emphasis on business continuity as well. So while we're planning for the future, a succession is long-term planning, we're also ensuring that the day-to-day operations are protected in the form of a contingency plan or a business continuity plan. So those elements for me needed to be a part of any endeavor that I embarked on, and this is the way that things were set up.
I like how you talked about this transition as if it was very natural, but I talked to a few entrepreneurs who started from a corporate role, and usually there is a story. There is a very prominent venture fund manager here in Charlotte, Dr. Shanta Williams.
Okay.
She's also a Black woman, and she always dreamt to be a venture capitalist, but nobody would hire her. And she started her own fund.
Okay.
Is there a story behind your transition beyond what you shared?
No, for me that was it. I think I've always been a curious person, and I think I know that, I got to the stage where I had all of these ideas bubbling up and I really didn't see action or any sort of traction around that idea. So it was just an opportunity where I said, you know what, I'm going to go for this. And this is where it began.
What was the most difficult part about parting with a cushy corporate job?
I would say the degree of certainty. Because the entrepreneur's journey sometimes can be quite uncertain. There are days when the levels of rejection for different elements of the business, whether it's, ideas or speaking to clients or speaking to customers, this for me was something that was quite new, but it's something that you get used to and you adjust to if this is the path that you have chosen. So I think for me, making that adjustment, that was a little bit of a learning curve, understanding that the path is not necessarily always straight, but full of quite a number of loops and winds, and sometimes you go backwards to go forward. So having that, and that happens in the corporate world as well, but I think it's more controlled, right? But when you are an entrepreneur, you're the one who's making the decision, so you're the one who's kind of charted the path. So there's much more on your shoulders.
And I wanted to stay on this for a little bit. In terms of making the transition, did you try to do it as a side hustle or did you jump right into going into this full time?
I would say perhaps almost like a side hustle, but it was more than a side hustle because of the number of hours. So I never looked at it as a hobby, right? Once I had the idea to really start this, I immediately started assembling the team to get it together, right? So this is something that was happening in tandem with my day-to-day job, which, as you can imagine, made things quite unsustainable for quite some time because I was doing them both in tandem, right? I'd have the day job and then go home, and fortunately the time zones worked in my favor. So I was able to, start working at 6 or 7 p.m. and then take it late into the evening to really build this out. So I think it would, I think when you hear side hustle, there's the connotation of, somebody just not really serious, and not a hobby. But for me, it didn't start in that way. I ensured that the infrastructure was right, and that took quite a bit of time to set things up.
Did you bootstrap the business?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think I was in a fortunate position to be able to bootstrap and build. And for me, at the stage that we were in as a business, this, of course, you always hope to have, all of the money coming in and all of the clients coming in at the very beginning. But fortunately, I was in a position where I was able to self-fund until we got to that point.
And how big was the initial team?
So the initial team was a team of, let's say, 3. Yeah.
Including you?
Including myself, and then we expanded from there. The biggest component being the IT team. I would say for an advisory firm, yes, still the IT team. Yeah.
So in terms of IT team, the 2 people were developers? Yes, developers who really helped us, from the very beginning, building out, the website, and a lot of the assessments and surveys that we use, they're the ones who kind of put things together, given the requirements, of course, right? We provided them with the requirements and they were able to do the build outs. And since the business has grown from that because what I would mention is that we have automated the business continuity element of the business, right? So, and this is what this is what I would have spoken at the conference around. And it's essentially providing automated business continuity plans for small to medium-sized businesses, which essentially digitized that advisory component for small businesses that we were doing, right, around business continuity planning. So the team was able to very seamlessly make that transition and ensure that the product that we were using in-house had that customer-facing and the outside-facing veneer that it needed to have. So we've been working together from the beginning, essentially. And in terms of, I speak with a lot of startup founders,
Yes.
and it's usually the challenge to attract technical talent,
Yes.
just because those people are typical in demand. Right now, the situation is a little bit different, but usually high-quality people are in big demand, and they're very expensive.
Yes.
So what was your strategy? Were those people you knew before, or was there some equity arrangement? How did you get those first employees to commit to you?
No, it was not an equity arrangement, but it was essentially they would come in as needed on an as needed basis, right? Perhaps my requirements were not as complicated as some of the other startups, and I think this is where there's a little bit of a nuance that perhaps needs to be mentioned, because perhaps for some of the startups right now, the technologies that they're looking to bring in-house are quite advanced. But if you remember where we're starting from, it's more or less relative basic development work, not to undermine the work that they have done. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it was as complicated. So they were able to come in just as needed, of course, build out what needed to be built out, test what needed to be tested, and then just stay in the background in case there were any changes that needed to be made. And this is how we kind of built the relationship. My background is not an IT background, it's not in tech. So a very good friend of mine helped me with the hiring process to select the right fit, right? So, I was able to map out what I was looking for with his guidance, and then he was able to say, well, these are the skills that we would need to hire for, and he was quite instrumental in doing that.
Sounds like a great advice to have a friend like that or someone with that experience involved.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that I could have done it on my own, to be quite honest.
And what year was the company started?
In 2018.
So right now in 2023, could you talk a little bit about your current team?
Yeah, so the current team has grown, and of course, the IT guys remain on board, but the expertise is expanding a little bit more. Particularly because we have the sales-facing element of it, there's needed to be an expansion in terms of some of the capabilities on the team. So we've kind of expanded to meet that demand, and we have a little bit of assistance when it comes to the actual day-to-day running, just to ensure that nothing gets dropped. So we're expanding, but following the roadmap of the company, there is more to come.
And I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and you seem to have like two organizations. One more direct consulting for bigger companies, so family offices, and one for small and medium-sized where it's automated.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit, how do those two arms of your business work together?
Right, so everything started under the one umbrella. And perhaps I didn't articulate this as well earlier. Everything started under one umbrella as an advisory component. The business continuity element of what we have done is what we ended up digitizing, right? So it's all just a breakaway from what we had already been doing, but because it's so tech heavy and almost a standalone proposition or a turnkey proposition for users, it made sense to separate that from the advisory side of the house. So everything still sits under one umbrella. Succession Strength is the mother brand, but Continuity Strength speaks to the digital contingency plans that are created. And this has essentially thrust this element of the business into the tech world, because it is a tech-forward solution, right? That is backed by the advisory experience. So this is why the models seem quite different, but everything started off as advisory, but we just digitized a component of that.
And in terms of your time in the day, there are like a limited number of hours. Where would you spend the most of your time?
Ooh, that is a tough question, because we're more or less at the beginning stages. There's quite a bit to be done, right? So. It depends on the time of year. Sometimes it's on strategy. Sometimes it's on sales calls with potential customers. And then a lot of the time it's actually, working face to face with some of our clients and customers and getting that feedback. So day by day it varies, and season by season. Summertime is when we tend to take a step back and have a look at strategy. And then, of course, there are the conferences, which are quite energizing, I have to say.
Sure, and I wanted to follow up in terms of like your focus between those two, like traditional advisory and technology-enabled continuity. Would you say they get equal amount of your time, or do you prioritize one or the other?
It depends on the season. It really depends on the season, because there are some times when the demand on the advisory side of the house is much higher. and then sometimes when it wanes. So for example, during the summertime, it tends to be a little bit less. So yeah.
You have time to build the software.
Well, I'm not building, as I mentioned. Fortunately, there's a team for that. I'm not doing the building myself, but it means that the conversations on the continuity strength side of the house, there's room for that. And those tend to come in during the summertime as well.
So I wanted to step back a little bit from business and ask, what book are you reading right now?
I'm reading Atomic Habits by Stephen Covey. Are you familiar with this one?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Okay.
So what's the biggest insight so far?
Well, the premise is making minor changes, little changes along the way that end up having a major impact, right? So you don't necessarily need to, hit for the fences every single time. And this follows some of the advice that I received from a mentor many, many years ago. And what he said was, listen, Rochelle, you're not going to get the ball down the field every single time you make a kick, right? Sometimes one little boot, one little kick, even if it moves 1 inch or 2 inches, sometimes that can be good enough, right? So a lot of the premise of the book resonated because of that, and it seems to be a lesson that comes back from time to time. Of course, you want to ensure that the ball travels the full field every time, but it's not always possible. And in those events or in those cases when it's not, sometimes just a little bit of progress is still good enough.
Could you give an example of something you changed based on the book?
Well, it's not necessarily. I've just begun, so I'm halfway through, I would say, so I haven't implemented a lot of that in my life. But a lot of what I'm reading resonates because of the advice that I received before. So it's confirmation of what I had received before, and a good reminder sometimes, right?
Sure. Definitely something I need to look into because it's not the first time I'm hearing the name of the book.
Yes, it's a really good book, and it came very well recommended. I'm happy that I was able to get it.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
So outside of work, what else takes your time?
Well, when I am here in the US, it's spending a lot of time with family and friends because I have a bigger network of family and friends here in the US. When I'm in Europe, however, it's also spending time with friends, I would say, less family, more friends, and doing quite a bit of exploring.
What kind of exploring?
So when I'm in Amsterdam in my free time, it's very easy to find me in one of the hundreds of museums that litter the city and the country, I would say. Or sometimes it's just very easy for me to jump on a train and go to another city either within the Netherlands or outside of the Netherlands. So if I'm going to Belgium or France, that's very easy and very accessible. So, if I want something that's close to home, I pop into a museum, have a lovely walk, maybe sit on a terrace at the side of one of the canals and have a coffee or something. It's a very, very easy kind of life, I have to say. But if it's on a weekend, jump on a train, head to another city and see what there is to see.
Very cool. I love it. And everything is pretty close in Europe, and you can use trains.
Very close. And that makes it very convenient.
You mentioned family in the US, and right now we are in Charlotte, North Carolina. So where is your family?
Yeah, we're spread out all over the US, I have to say. Yeah, but mainly on the East Coast.
So we started talking about universities, and I know you are working with some top universities as a mentor for family businesses. So could you talk a little bit about some unique challenges that you have to deal with working with students as a mentor?
Yes, absolutely. So, I've in my corporate life and afterwards, I found myself being a mentor in many situations. So there are 2 universities, one here in the U.S. and the other one in Europe, that kind of tapped me on the shoulder to be a mentor for their students. Family business students and non-family business students as well, but particularly those who had an entrepreneurial mindset or entrepreneurial aspirations, I would say. So this is what I do in my free time as well. I forgot to mention that, but this is also a way that I spend my time. And for me, it's quite energizing, right? In many cases, there's so many challenges that are faced by no student is the same. I think that we can all agree that no individual is the same, no student is the same, and there's situations when they come, to sit across the table from me, their situations are not the same. Which I think makes it even more energizing for someone who is very solutions oriented.
I think I want to follow up on the question
As
I
you
just
wish.
asked, yes,
As you wish.
about mentorship.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you were tapped by 2 universities.
Yes.
How does it happen, like in practical terms?
Well, because I had a relationship, or I knew of, one of the universities is a university that I did an exchange program with. So there was already a standing relationship with them. So once they understood what it was that I was doing, they asked whether or not I would be willing to be an entrepreneur in residence, which I said yes to. And for the other one, it was through my network. They kind of reached out again, heard what I was doing, and said, hey, would you like to come on board and be a mentor for some of our students within the family business space? And I said yes.
So in terms of commitment, how big is it?
Well, it's I wouldn't say that it's that big. There are seasons when the commitment is a little bit more. The university in Europe, for example, runs a venture capital competition. And during that time, the interactions with the students tends to be a little bit more. For the other university, it's, as on an as needed basis that students kind of come in. So there can be a month or two when, no one reaches out, and then there can be a month when 2 or 3 people reach out.
So I understand that the university shares the information that we have Rochelle Clarke as our entrepreneur resident, so mentor, and then it's up to students to reach out.
Yes. Exactly right. But I'm not the only one. In many cases, for both universities, there are a number of fellow mentors who are also doing the same thing. So the students have options for, whom they'd like to interact with.
Could you give an example of the last request that someone came to you?
This was a situation where we had a startup founder who was launching this startup for women's health, and the issue that she was facing was conflict among the co-founders.
Okay.
I think that's quite popular, particularly in the startup world. So she was just asking for advice on how best to navigate that. And the reason that she reached out is because my background is also in governance, right? So ensuring that, the team is set up in the right way and there's the right governance to ensure that there's the right level of accountability. The other reason that she reached out is because one of the co-founders was a family member of hers.
Okay.
So it fell in the realm of family business and startup. So that made it quite interesting. And then there was another member of the founding team who was non-family. So these are some of the dynamics that we see in family businesses as well, when the majority of the members at the helm are family members, but you may have 1 or 2 outsiders who are also part of that management team. And the dynamic can be a little bit complicated in those situations. So I was able to advise her from that perspective.
So how do you manage that interplay of business strategy and family relationships?
Well, it's quite unique. It depends on the business and it depends on the family. So it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, if I'm honest, because the structures that they would have set up to manage can also be quite different. So the approach in those situations is asking a lot of questions to understand what the dynamic is, what the existing structure is, trying to, in a very short amount of time, get to what the issue is, and then just brainstorming a few ideas for getting around the issue.
So when we were preparing for this interview, I was a little bit surprised by your approach to mentorship.
Yeah.
And I have a question which kind of is more metaphorical to try to make a better understanding.
Yes.
So if your approach was a superhero to mentorship, what would be its superpower?
So, superheroes tend to have, their one superpower that they're known for. I can't tell you what I don't have one superpower that I use for every single mentee that comes across my table. And that's not the way that it works for me. I think what's most important is understanding what the issue is. And in some cases, if I have experience in that, explaining to them, hey, this is how I have handled something similar in the past. But remember, not every situation is the same. So there may be situations that come across my table that I do not have direct experience with. In that case, you reach into the toolbox for similar experiences. So then it becomes a brainstorming session where I say, okay, in that scenario, if that were me, these are some of the tools that I would consider using. So yeah, I'm afraid I'm not going to be one of those superheroes with, one particular superpower. For me, it's just being open to what comes across the table, understanding that a solution that may have worked in the past may not work exactly in the same way. So just being open to be flexible.
And typically, if a student reaches out, is it just one conversation, or there are a couple of conversations? How is it typically structured?
It depends. Some reach out again if follow-up is needed, but then others, with the guidance, they're able to kind of run with that.
Are you curious if you've done a good job, or are you curious what happened in the situation? Do you try to stay in touch?
No, for the mentees that I have through the universities, that's not the nature of the relationship necessarily, right? It's, hey, I'm here if you need me.
Sure.
Right? However, for my personal mentees who, have reached out because, perhaps in the corporate world, they have seen me do something and they've reached out and said, hey, can you be my mentor? In those cases, the relationship is a little bit more developed where, they would reach out every couple of months or so. We would speak every 4 months or 6 months. And this is where I'd get the progress, right? To say, okay, this is what we did the last time. And then they give the feedback. Hey, I tried this and it worked or it didn't work. This is what I'm facing today. What would you advise? So it's a little bit of a difference in terms of the approach. Yeah.
And this other approach, is it through just your network that people reach out to you?
Yes. Yes, exactly right. So, many have been folks that I've worked with before, more junior folks who've kind of reached out many, many years ago and said, hey, can you guide me in my career with whatever they were dealing with? And the relationship has continued. Others have been others have come from my network where they've said, hey, this is the issue that I'm facing. I'm looking for a mentor. Do you have the time? And as long as my time permits, then this is something, and as long as there's some alignment there, then this is something that I would tend to do.
For yourself and for your business, do you use mentors?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. I've always had mentors from the beginning of my career, actually. Yeah, even before university, and they have been instrumental, I would say, in guiding me.
Could you give an example or illustrate one person that had a particularly big impact on your life?
Oh, there's so many in so many ways. One of the best decisions that I have made, actually, was as a result of one of these mentors whom I ended up meeting on a flight when I was in my consulting days. Ended up sitting next to a gentleman who ended up just being absolutely fascinating. He was the CEO of a very big company at the time, and at that time I had just received my acceptance into Wharton's MBA class, and it was quite exciting. And on airplane rides you end up chatting with someone. And at the time he said, okay, congratulations, that's fantastic. And he mentioned that he also did his MBA, but at a European school that had an exchange program with Wharton. And I told him, it's funny that you mention that because I was considering doing the exchange at that university. And he said, do it. Without hesitation, do it. It ended up that he was also one of the people who helped structure that exchange. But I think it was one of the best decisions that I made, because it really helped to expand my purview beyond the US. I know that I did have a lot of international classmates at Wharton for sure, and there was a lot of learning during our classroom conversations. But I really enjoyed the exchange program that took me out to Singapore and really exposed me to a completely different area of the world. So I think that was a fantastic piece of advice.
I love that example because it looks how organic how organically mentors can come into someone's life.
Yes.
We just need to be open-minded.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And the important thing is the fit as well, right? And at least sometimes it's hard to know whether or not you're going to mesh or gel with the person. But as long as the fit is good and you're both feeling good about the relationship, then it can be one of the most beautiful things. Unfortunately, we were able to, in that very short period of time, we were able to click, right, on many levels. So, yeah, it was great.
One of the fields of my interest is to explore, can we kind of build mentorship relationships where it doesn't necessarily have to click with every single person. And what I found, if there is a structure in place, like a team of mentors, then mentors click with each other.
Yes.
And they come in as a clicked team.
Yes.
And then even, like, some of them may click with you and you click with some of them, but as a team, they become not as good as this one mentor you are perfect match with, but the second best.
Yes. I do have examples of that. I'm happy that you brought that up. For the mentorship work that I do as an entrepreneur in residence, when we're judging the startup companies for the VC competition, the judges are all entrepreneurs in residence, right? And we do advise, in some cases, some of the startup companies. And in many cases, our offline conversations that are not with the startup companies end up being the ones that really amplify our relationship, because everyone brings something that's completely different to the table. So I cannot tell you how many times I've ended up forming and building relationships with fellow mentors just because we ended up having so much in common. And you're absolutely right. In that scenario and in that situation, there wasn't necessarily, or they didn't need to be a click between the mentor and the mentee. And that's because the reason for that relationship was already pre-established, right? There was a specific purpose for having that mentor at the table, and it was based on a specific knowledge base that they had. Right? So for example, if you're mentoring a startup and your expertise is marketing, then you're advising that mentee on marketing, right? Marketing for a specific startup, right? There's not much room for deviating from that, because that's why the mentee is coming to you.
Sure.
Right? So there are the parameters that really define what the relationship is going to look like. In that case, there doesn't necessarily need to be that relationship, because it truly is an exchange of knowledge, of experience. And the mentee has the confidence that the mentor has already done this, right? So it's an advisory relationship with very clear parameters. But you're absolutely right. In some cases, a lot of the relationship building happens among the mentors. And the mentee is out of the picture.
So I wanted to come back to the core of your business.
Yeah.
What do you think is the right stage of organization to start thinking about succession and continuity? Do we have to start doing it from the very beginning, or is there a specific period on the journey, entrepreneurial journey, when it becomes essential?
Oh, well, listen, the advice that I would tend to give around this is, listen, the moment you start a company, right, that is beyond a hobby, the moment there are people relying on the income of that business, you need to have a continuity plan in place. Remember, continuity planning is for short term, right? What happens if, right? And it's particularly a contingency plan in the event of a disruption. In the startup world, in many cases, that disruption can be conflict between co-founders, let's be honest. For smaller business, it can be something like a key employee who leaves unexpectedly. It can certainly be weather related. It can certainly be cyber attacks, right? So the range of unplanned disruptions that can potentially impact a small business are so many. And the implications of this on a small business are tremendous. What we see is that an unplanned disruption can really cost a business quite a bit. The estimations are upwards $85,000 to $100,000, right? Wow. Or what a disruption would cost. If you're talking in the cyber world, it's closer to $125,000 if they're able to survive it. In many cases, they are not. What a contingency plan does is it increases the chances of that business being able to weather whatever that disruption is, right? Because it's a contingency plan. So what I would say is from the moment you decide that this business is more than for yourself, once there are other people relying on the income of this business, you should have a contingency plan in place, right? Whom to contact in the event of a disruption. How do you pay your bills and keep getting paid in the event of a disruption? Where the key documents of the business are stored, and then potential workarounds for the business. If, for example, your primary way of working is impacted, what is your plan B to keep this business running? And what is your communication strategy? How do you reach out to your customers? How do you reach out to your vendors, right? Your employees, et cetera, and so forth. That having that plan in place gives that level of comfort to all of the key stakeholders so that they know that, hey, this business is in it for the long run. When we start talking about succession, we're talking long term, right? It can be a succession, it can be a sale. It's important for the owners of that business to have some idea as to what they think their exit is going to be or how they think their exit should look. The reason for that is because preparing for any business transition takes time. I can't tell you the number of times that an owner comes up and says, oh, I would like to, pass this business on to my son or my daughter, only to find out at that moment, son or daughter does not want anything to do with the business, right? So then they look around frantically to find out whether or not there's a next warm body to take over this business. Finding none, they just said, well, I'll just sell the business. Well, I work in tandem with a lot of business brokers, and this is when we kind of shake our heads and say, no, it doesn't work that way. The amount of time it takes to prepare a business for a succession is just about the amount of time that it takes to prepare a business for sale. So some of the business transition work that we do, evaluating businesses to figure out whether or not they're ready for sale, for example, that takes time. Are your finances in order, right? Is this business transferable, for example? When we have investors coming to us and saying, hey, have a look at this business. I'm considering acquiring this business. Have a look at it and let me know if there are any red flags, right? We do a red flag due diligence, right? In many cases, we're able to uncover some of the issues that had the owner taken the time to get their business in order, they would be in a much better position, right? Not having taken that time, however, we have many cases where the investor says, there are too many red flags here for me to consider this, right? Or the owner gets super surprised and says, hey, I didn't know that there was so much wrong with my business. And then what happens is that the evaluation ends up going down, right? The amount that they think they're going to sell it for, ends up being a lot less. So I say all of that to say, if it's a brand new business, a contingency plan is important. But once you're thinking long term, it's important to have some idea as to how you would like this business, how you would like to exit this business, because it takes time and the steps to prepare can be a little bit different.
How much of an investment does this planning require?
Well, it really depends.
I'm looking, I understand if it's a huge company, it's one thing, but I'm looking from the point of view of a smaller organization.
It's really hard to tell. I couldn't put a figure on this because I don't know what the business is coming with, right? What is their baseline scenario? How much work needs to be done, right? Have they been taking any steps along the way, or is it that they just have a business and nothing is in order, right? So it really is on a case-by-case basis.
But in your experience, do you have some general understanding, like a typical client that uses your software piece?
Oh, the software piece?
Yes.
Okay, for the continuity planning.
For continuity planning.
Yes, okay. So this is something that they can go online, answer the questions, and a contingency plan is created for them. Right? And they also get a list of resilience improvement suggestions, letting them know how they can make things better. And the types of businesses that we would focus on are small to medium-sized businesses, as I mentioned. So it goes from the sole entrepreneur to the smaller business that doesn't have an established management team in place, to the medium-sized business that does have an established management team in place. And that can run anywhere from, I don't know, $100 for the sole entrepreneur to, I think, $500 or so for the medium-sized entrepreneur. And so that tends to be the range for the online turnkey plans.
So it's a very sensible thing to invest in. Like, it's a very sensible thing to invest into a gym membership and into a good diet.
Yes.
But it's fairly difficult to get people because the benefits of the investment are not necessarily immediate. So are there any insights, as you've been working in that space since 2018, that you came up with in terms of what makes for an effective marketing or sales communications to get people excited about doing the right thing?
Yeah, well, to be quite honest, and I hate to say this, but COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think, ended up doing quite a bit of legwork when it came to sales and marketing around the importance of having contingency planning in place. And the reason that I say that is because in many cases, business owners have heard of business insurance. And many of them, rightly or wrongly, have put some hope in an insurance policy to ensure that whatever disruption comes, they'll be covered in some measure and in some way. Unfortunately, what many of them have found since the pandemic is that, hey, maybe I'm not covered for what I think I'm covered for. Right? And in many cases, let's be honest, many people don't understand what's in their insurance policies. So many policyholders were denied getting their claims paid for business interruption, because business interruption kicks in only if there's physical damage to the business, which was not the case in the pandemic for many businesses, obviously. So coming out of that, what we found is that many business owners and many policyholders have said, listen, I need to take a more proactive role when it comes to ensuring that I am protected. How do I do that? As a result of that, they've been demanding a lot more from their risk advisors. So their insurance providers, they've been saying, hey, what more can I be doing to ensure that I am insulated and that I am protected? And this is where the solution that we have has kind of come into the picture. Because in response, we have a lot of risk advisors, whether they are insurance carriers or your accountants or your wealth advisors, who are now saying, we need to take a more active role when it comes to risk management and ensuring that our clients, our policyholders, are protected in the event of unplanned disruptions. Because let's be honest, if a smaller business goes under, it also affects the insurance company. So it's also in their best or the advisory company. So it's in their best interest to ensure that businesses are protected and are able to weather unplanned disruptions as much as possible. And of course, cyber is now on everyone's agenda. So, right, we're seeing a lot of interest there in proactive risk management.
So do I understand correctly that advisors and insurance companies are your primary channel or sales channel?
They're also a sales channel for us. They're also a sales channel for us, and for the reasons that I have articulated. Many of them have recognized that the cost to service small to medium-sized businesses can be tremendous, which is why they're looking for partnerships in the tech space to help minimize that cost, but still ensure that their smaller business clients and customers and policyholders receive the amount of support and the level of support to protect their businesses.
I've come across a number of startups in fintech space.
Yes.
And a lot of them have the same strategy. Let's go to the advisor. They have a relationship with the client, and for them it would be easy to offer the product or the innovation. And a lot of startups found that particularly challenging to do it at scale. Could you share your secret sauce with this segment? What has worked really well for you to be able to gain the attention of advisors when everybody tries to get to them?
Well, I think it comes down to the need, right? I think that, as I've mentioned before, the market forces, the customers and the clients are demanding more from the advisors, right? They want more than a transactional relationship. If you are my trusted advisor, I want to know that you care about me and that you care about my business. What they're looking for is more personalized risk advice, right? They want it personalized. They want it, at a price that they can afford, and they want to get it from the person that they're paying to provide that advice, right? If they don't have that, what we're finding is that many of them are going to marketplaces. Because it's very easy for a client or a customer to get some of these services from, an insurance marketplace, right? But carriers and advisors don't want that. They want to retain those relationships. So they have found that it is in their best interest to meet the needs, the evolving needs, or the evolving because they're constantly evolving needs of their client base. And this, I think, is what's helping to push this.
And essentially, you are helping them to retain clients and increase customer satisfaction.
Yes, exactly right. In some cases, we have had advisors who provide this sort of risk management and risk mitigation services, but only for their much bigger clients or their much bigger customers, right? Because, the cost to serve. But the small to medium-sized segment of their portfolio, in many cases, has been neglected. Coming out of the pandemic, when they saw the attrition, right? From businesses naturally shutting down, and then B, from dissatisfied or unsatisfied customers, they've recognized that they need to take some action in that area. So many of them are looking for ways to differentiate their small to medium-sized business offering so that it becomes more than just transactional. And this, I think, is what's driving some of that demand as well.
I'm really curious to get a little bit into the depth of continuity planning.
Yes.
You've mentioned that every situation is unique.
Yes.
That's true. But there are certain patterns, like patterns as something repeatable or like problems that typically come about. Like you mentioned, challenges with your business partner or challenges with a family member and family dynamics. So I'm sure there are certain themes that are kind of universal or pretty similar. In that context, do you see that technology is going to play a larger part to be able to make this continuity planning even cheaper? Because you can, ask my ChatGPT 5 or 4 to help me think through those questions. What's your take on this? Is it something that you feel will be a major play, or do you feel that this very customized advice needs to come directly from the certified professional?
Listen, I think we're in the day and age, Igor, where we can't say that anything needs to come from, an experienced advisor. To be quite honest, I've been quite impressed by some of the newer technologies in the space. I've seen some of the use cases, and I'm sure that I have not even exhausted the breadth of use cases for these technologies. So I'm truly, really excited to see how the industry as a whole can evolve and can move forward with the addition of some of these technologies. I would never say that anything is the holy grail, because we have seen a lot of disruption in a number of industries that a few years ago would have been unheard of. Right, so I do believe that technology is going to play a major role across the industries. The role that would take, however, I can't say at the moment. I'm not sure at the moment, but I'm excited to see.
I think last week I was talking to a doctor, I have another podcast, Health Tech Crew, Dr. Joel Selenacchio, and we were talking about ChatGPT acting as a medical advisor. And the question that they asked, that he said everybody asks him, but what about personal touch of a doctor? Shouldn't the doctor be involved? And he said, Igor, in the 95% of cases, people do not have access to a doctor. Yeah. There is no doctor in play at all. Yeah. And what technology at scale allows you to get is these people get some help.
Yes.
So I get that this is similar in the financial advice space.
Exactly right. And this is why we ended up digitizing or productizing this portion of our advisory services, because we recognized that, hey, having the smaller business always have to go to a physical advisor to help with their contingency planning, that ended up being a barrier for many. They didn't even know that this type of advice existed. And in many cases, it can be cost prohibitive for some of them, right? So just, following that same type of thinking to ensure that there is a product that's scalable and accessible to many small businesses, I don't think that we can say that this will not evolve beyond this. It truly is about ensuring equitable access to the right resources for, small businesses in this case, but I do see the industry expanding from here.
So where would you say is the biggest blue ocean or the biggest land of opportunity for your business?
Igor, yeah, this is something that I can't say at the moment, to be quite honest, because I don't have a grasp of all of the technologies that are out there. But I do believe that there are some opportunities that are coming up for sure.
So I wanted to ask about specific projects and initiatives that are underway already, that you're working on or are particularly excited about. Could you talk about a few of those?
Yes, absolutely. So with our contingency planning, our business continuity planning, I have to say, these are operational contingency plans, right? Ensuring that there's a plan B to keep this business running in the event of whatever the disruption is. We've always had a component within the algorithm that spoke to IT continuity, right? And cyber preparedness, right? Are you prepared for cyber attacks? But we have decided to just expand that module in the background a little bit more, just because of the fact that cyber is now a much bigger deal than it was when we began a number of years ago, right? It's certainly on the forefront of many businesses, smaller ones as well. We are members of the Small Business Digital Alliance, which is run by the U.S. government. And one of the things that the administrator mentioned is that there is a lot of interest around ensuring that businesses, particularly smaller businesses, are cyber prepared, right? And this is a role. And what you'll find is that a lot of the discussions right now, when it comes to disruptions, are around preparedness. Are businesses prepared for whatever the disruption is? And this is exactly the place that we play in, right? So we're really excited about expanding that cyber module of our business to speak more to some of the solutions, because as I mentioned, users not only get this contingency plan, but they get a list of resilience improvement suggestions as well. So I'm really excited about some of those recommendations that we can provide for smaller businesses so that they can actually take some action to ensure that they are cyber prepared as well. And I think the beauty about this, having an operational contingency plan, is that the plan needs to be functional regardless of what the disruption is, right? And we try to capture that as much as possible. So cyber is high on the agenda, which means that there's a little bit more attention given to that particular module. So I'm really excited about that.
And we have trains, so it will be in the podcast a little bit, but that's fine. In terms of this cyber market,
yes,
I'm always curious about the entrepreneurial side of things.
Yes.
So you're entering a space which is pretty crowded. There are a lot of players, which could be a challenge and an opportunity. So are you planning to navigate it through? Like, a lot of people offer advice on building a resilient cyber network.
Yes, we don't do that.
So you are essentially then become a connector to those people. Precisely,
right. So the place that we play in is providing them with the resources, right? We let them know, okay, if you haven't taken any action around cyber preparedness, this is where you can start, right? So this is where some of our partnerships come into play, where we're able to say, hey, consider X or Y or Z to ensure that you're cyber prepared.
So would it be correct to say that you are essentially a lead generation engine for some of your partners?
Perhaps, yes.
What would you say is the core value proposition to the market? Is it like a combination of value to the small and medium-sized customer and their business? Is it the lead generation business for your partners, or is it something else?
Listen, ultimately it's always about the small business. That is our core mantra, and that's where it started, right? All of this would not exist if they did not exist, right? So our goal at the end of the day is to ensure that they have the right resources to weather disruptions and stay in business. Weather the disruptions, stay in business, and grow, right? Which means that any partner that we work with needs to be able to be bringing something like that to the table as well. So this is not, there might be some element of lead generation, but we never sell products. For us, our partnerships are more about how can you make our core clients and our core customers more resilient in this area, right? Is it by ensuring that they know the right steps to take in this area? Right? So you'll have elements of that coming through, and then the small business can then decide if they want to take action further than what we're able to provide. But it's about building up that awareness, building up that resilience, because this is what an informed client or an informed customer for us is most important, because they're able to proactively manage their own resilience.
I love that focus. Yeah. This is awesome. It's been quite a journey that you've been on. If you could send a tweet to your younger self, or give some form of advice through the insights and that you gained on this journey, what would that advice or tweet say?
Yeah, that's a good one. Hang in there. Hang in there. As with any journey, there've been, and for me, by no means near the end of the journey, perhaps just beginning, for better or worse, because that means there perhaps, a few more twists and turns along the path. But for me, it would be, hey, just continue doing it, continue going, right? There are lessons to be learned along the way, and there are going to be peaks and there are going to be valleys, right? But just buckle up that seatbelt and keep going, as long as you're making that progress, right? Even if it's a little bit of progress, right, towards that end goal, then yeah, you're good.
Are there some values that you could talk about that kind of define you as a mentor and a mentee potentially?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Igor. And to be quite honest, I think in previous conversations that we have had, for me, I wouldn't necessarily say that I have a set philosophy when it comes to my mentorship approach, right? I'm very open in terms of my approach, open to the person that's in front of me and the issue that comes up. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, it's quite, if I find myself in the mindset of having a set philosophy, what that means is that there can be some sort of resistance if a situation presents itself to me that's not along the lines of that philosophy. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's because of this that I don't have, a philosophy or a set approach when it comes to mentoring. For me, it's just being open to what comes and to the situation at hand. Sometimes it's business related. Sometimes I'll give you an example. Sometimes the person sitting in front of me, if we're connected via one of the family business mentoring scenarios, I have had cases that have come that are related to business strategy. I have had cases that have come, or students or mentees that have come, who have issues with family conflict and dynamics, and that family dynamic. Right? And the approach that you take with each is completely different. In some cases, it's an approach that I have seen before because I've dealt with something that's similar, but I hesitate when it comes to giving the same advice around what worked in that scenario and worked in that situation. The reason for that is because I don't necessarily know the full history and the full context behind the person that's sitting in front of me. We have a limited amount of time. So while I may refer to, what went on before, I try to be a little bit open in terms of suggesting potential ways or things for them to consider, right? So my approach tends to be very, very open while still providing some value and some direction, but I don't have a set philosophy or a set approach. I tend to be quite open-minded when it comes to working with mentees, which perhaps makes it a little bit difficult when it comes to advising other mentors on what their approach might be and should be. What I tend to say in this case is just be present, listen to what comes across your table, and just trust that the solutions that you have in your tool belt, that you're going to be able to find something that works. And it's a process of co-creating, So unfortunately, I'm not very structured when it comes to having that approach. I'm very open.
But to me, that sounds like, honestly, the academic approach I came across in books and mentorship.
Okay.
One of the typical advice points that I've used in the mentorship program that I was involved in is tame your advice monster.
Yes.
So, and there was a New York Times article where they talked about mentorship and wisdom.
Yes.
Not in the sense of mentorship being Master Yoda, who knows all the answers, but like you said, someone who comes in, who is present, who is in your space, and who co-creates with you or allows you to focus on your challenge and figure out the path on your own, just providing support.
Yes.
That's what I found works really well. And what you're talking about seems to be exactly that.
Okay, fair enough. So we are in alignment. we got there eventually. No, but in some cases, so outside of the mentor, so that's mentorship approach. If it's an advisory session, and it may be a little bit different if there's some specific action that you're really holding someone to account around, then it's a completely different ballgame.
Like you mentioned, if there is someone is looking for a marketing advice or
yes.
I don't know, like a very tactical issue.
Exactly right. So that seems to have worked for me. I haven't had bad reviews around the process so far, and they keep coming back. So it's something that I enjoy.
And about mentorship, you mentioned this team dynamic.
Yes.
So what gives you more satisfaction right now, when you have an opportunity to work as a team, or when you have more opportunity to advise or mentor one-on-one? Or is it equally pleasant?
I think that it's equally pleasant. They both offer something that's a little bit different. In the one-on-one scenario, in terms of brainstorming, it's usually me pulling from my experience, right? Someone has come with an issue and I've kind of said, well, this is how I might have dealt with this in this scenario or in that scenario or in that scenario. The typical consultant. Once a consultant, always a consultant, right? You always have the tool belt of solutions, right? So it's about sharing that experience. When we're in the team dynamic, however, it's a little bit different, because then I find that I'm able to build on a lot of my experience by having that interface with fellow mentors, right? And the perspective that they bring to the table might be a little bit different.
Sure.
Right? Just to give an example, without getting too specific in terms of naming names or anything, in some cases we evaluate startups and sometimes we have to do a ranking, right, around different qualities, right? How would you evaluate the team, or how would you evaluate the financials, et cetera, and so forth. And it's really curious to see the rankings for every mentor on these areas because they can be completely different. Having a conversation, though, with each of these mentors, you're able to see things from their perspective. In some cases, you don't necessarily always agree, but having that conversation, you're really able to understand where they're coming from on this. In some cases, it's an informed perspective that they're bringing because perhaps they have worked in that in that particular industry. In some cases, they have not, right? Being able to really go back and forth and have that, as they say, it's mind floss, right? That mind candy. Yeah. That for me, yeah, it resonates in a completely different way, but still very enjoyable as well.
I agree, and I think where I'm coming from, I've tried like a team, like not a team. I tried my first venture into mentorship was I did a program called Community MBA here in Charlotte, kind of helping people get plugged into the community. And it was a cool project. It worked out well, but I threw in, without thinking too much, a mentorship component. I knew a number of people who I thought would be great mentors, and I connected folks who joined my Community MBA to be paired with those people. I gave them a one-pager saying, like, this is your first meeting, questions for you to start the conversation. Second, if you connect, that's great. If you don't, that's fine, it's just a meeting. And that really was a miserable experience. It failed really hard. There were people who cried after meeting the mentor. There were mentors who did some nasty things. And I was like, wow, there must be something I don't understand about the process. And what I was learning as I was running the Innovate Charlotte mentorship program, it's critical to over-communicate the expectations to both parties because there are different types of relationships, different scenarios, and if people come with wrong expectations, it becomes a mess.
Yes.
So that was my learning, and I agree with you speaking on this kind of team versus one-on-one. I do also do consulting, and this is my background, and that hurt me in mentorship scenarios because you have too many items in your toolbox. Every problem seems so easy to solve, but there is a reason, underlying reason why this problem is not being solved. Not because people are not smart and not know the answer. So kind of figuring out how to tame my advice monster has been a personal challenge, but I agree with the point that like one-on-one is more efficient if you have the right clicking power. If you don't, it's a mess. Team mentorship doesn't require this clicking power, and almost like technology, it can become the enabler of mentorship for more people. So that's why I'm pushing forward with my startup to allow more communities to offer team mentorship and give people who enjoy it a chance to be a mentor without over investing into like finding those opportunities.
Yes, and I think it's a fantastic initiative that you have. Fortunately, you learned those lessons quickly and early, right? Of failure. I think that's something that, as any entrepreneur or someone starting out, that you have to be prepared for at some point. What I would say is the relationships that we build with fellow mentors, those are just tremendously satisfying. As I mentioned, once you click and once you start working together, right, and you see what everyone brings to the table, I have had my network expand so much from having those conversations, even if we may have come in from with different perspectives on an issue. There's that level of respect, right? That, hey, you're a professional, I see where you're coming from, and that goes both ways, of course, and those have been tremendously satisfying.
So we were talking a little bit about the difference between like decisions and life on the corporate side and the entrepreneurial side. Could you talk a little bit about this difference?
Yes, one thing for me moving from corporate to the entrepreneurial side is the gravity of the decisions that need to be made. When you're in the corporate world, or when I was in the corporate world, and I'm speaking from my experience, right? Life was a little bit more comfortable, The decisions that needed to be made, yes, they were impactful, but you recognize that there's a complete difference once you're actually the person who's completely responsible for those decisions. Once you become an entrepreneur, the gravity of those decisions is a lot heavier. So for example, if you're on the corporate world and you're talking to an entrepreneur, perhaps you don't have that level of urgency when it comes to responding to questions. Perhaps you can say, hey, we'll get back to you when we get back to you, you'll be paid when you're paid, etc., and so forth. But the difference is that for an entrepreneur, that's their survival. That can be their survival. So that seemingly little delay on the corporate side can be a little bit of, can be detrimental to an entrepreneur who is thinking, hey, by the way, I need to make payroll in a week or two. I need this decision to move things forward, right? So that level of urgency, I think, is definitely amped up when you're an entrepreneur and there's a whole lot more on your shoulders, because there's so many others who may be depending on you, and you're more you're operating in survival mode for at least the first number of years, and for some it actually never goes away, because you're always chasing those objectives that need to be met, I should say, in order to keep the business running. So I think in terms of mindset, that's a difference to also consider. Corporate, because you're in a more in more of a protected environment, the implications of some of those decisions may not be as heavy as if you're in the entrepreneurial world.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, for your time and for talking with me on this podcast.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, what an enlightening conversation we've had today. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Rochelle Clarke for sharing her vast knowledge and insights with us. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Slice of Mentorship podcast. We hope you found this discussion as intriguing and informative as I did. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give a special mention to the organization that makes this podcast possible, Traction 5, which is a platform that supports team mentorship programs and innovators who are trying to support the ecosystem with mentorship. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. That's it from now. Stay healthy, stay informed, and tune in for another episode. Signing off.